So can the Falcons offense survive or even thrive this week without 1 or 5?
I know that you guys are disappointed that the Falcons lost another close game, but I promise they're going to get it together at some point.
I'm Aaron Freeman, and I get why the Falcons are showing loyalty to Younghoe Koo.
I'm Jarvis Davis. Can we kill the JJ McCarthy hype at least for 1 week?
ATL! ATL! Rise up, A-Town. It's the Falcons Squad. Everything Atlanta Falcons every week. Breaking down all the big hits and game-changing plays from the ATL. The way only the Locked On Podcast Network can. Straight from the ATL, the Falcons Squad Show starts now.
Welcome to the Falcons Squad Show, your home for the best Atlanta Falcons football talk. I'm your host, Tenitra Batiste. Alongside me are Locked On Falcons host, Aaron Freeman, Locked On analyst, Jarvis Davis, and 11 Alive anchor, Maria Martin. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. And our squad show is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So, Free kind of touched on it, but is this really a competition for Koo? We'll take that under further review. And how does Brick break down a potent Vikings offense? We'll unpack that. And how does Ra help this team redeem itself this week? We'll tell you. But first things first, we got to talk about this offense and whether or not it really can survive or even thrive without a Darnell Mooney or a Drake London in the lineup. So Jarvis, both Darnell Mooney and Drake London participated in practice Wednesday, limited participation. Coach Raheem Morris said and I put this in quotes because I want to hone in on it, and that is he expects Drake to play this week. But Coach didn't say Drake will play, kind of holding the cards close to the vest, if you will. But that said, and especially looking back on what week one looked like, we saw what it looked like without Darnell Mooney. We saw what it looked like when Drake wasn't in for the final 2 minutes of the fourth quarter. So does Drake, particularly not playing, determine whether or not this offense will have success and get a win against a Brian Flores-led defense?
Yeah, so I'm thinking worst case scenario. Let's just say Drake London and Darnell Mooney don't play. Yes, that will determine how I feel about this game, because when you think about the aspect of how many times, and I know we'll talk about it a little bit later as far as Michael Penix threw the football. I said going into the game last week against the Buccaneers, I said I don't want him with the ball in his hands and in the fourth quarter, even though he had success doing that. I don't want him to have to throw the win in a football game, because I want them to be able to depend on that running game, be able to turn around and hand the ball off the 7 and get the ball in his hands in the open field too, passing it to him as well. They listened to the show. They heard me on that one. So I think those are some of the things that I feel they need to carry this, especially on the road. You don't want to be in a situation because communication is going to be a factor, because we know Minnesota Vikings home crowd is going to be off their rocker, especially the way JJ played in the fourth quarter last week on Monday night as well. So those are some of the things that I'm thinking about. Like, okay, if Drake's not there, if Darnell's not there, and you have a situation where you got Cardell Hodge, Ray McLeod, whoever else do you want to throw, Davis Hills, like who else you want to throw in there, I think that's a recipe for no success, because Brian Flores will look at that wide receiver group and say, you know what? Y'all gonna just have to beat man coverage for most of the game, and we're gonna try y'all, and we're gonna send pressure, and we're gonna have this guy Michael Penix try to figure this thing out, and I don't want him to be in that situation.
Yeah, and Maria, when you kind of look at the scenarios, and of course both of these receivers dealing with shoulder injuries, but break that down for me a little bit more. Let's talk about it in terms of what it looked like not to have Darnell Mooney for an entire game last week, and what you felt that impact was, and not having Drake in that final stretch, and kind of what that would be like individually not to have them this week, because there could be a scenario where one of them plays but the other doesn't as well.
Yeah, well, let's be really honest. Darnell Mooney has not played for a very long time. So even if he gets back into the game, who knows what exactly that looks like? It's not like he's going to come out firing on all cylinders all of a sudden when we've barely seen him run any effective routes, even in practice. And remember, after training camp, the media, we only have an availability of a certain amount of windows. So we don't get to see a whole lot. However, for the first time in a long time, I saw both of those guys running routes in practice in our media availability window. So that's a good sign. But how healthy can they possibly be when for Darnell, this is an injury that has taken him out of the majority, if not all of training camp. And then for Drake, you expect him to play mostly because he's a dog and he can fight through stuff. What does that give you when it comes to a passing threat? Who knows, or a receiving threat in terms of Drake London's case. And you saw kind of this hodgepodge look of receivers because Drake London was limited. And look, Drake made some mistakes in that first game. Maybe it was because of the shoulder. Maybe it was because of the no playing in the preseason. We'll never really know. But he wasn't really the true Drake London that I think he can be. And especially as the season progresses, we know he's going to be unbelievable when he's healthy. Casey Washington played his first really true game as an NFL wide receiver, and he was fine. You know, I think it can get better for Casey. He's definitely maturing into that role. But when you don't have your number one and your number two receivers available, that certainly changes really your entire offensive game plan. And for them, the Falcons not being able to establish the run against Tampa really was a red flag to me because you already are down two of your best pass catchers. Drake was obviously later in the game, but I'm thinking forward thinking as well. If you're down those two guys and you can't establish the run, you're in hot water and you're there very quickly. So, you know, I think this is a big deal if these guys can't play. If one of them can play, that's a lot better to me than having none of them. That would be worst case scenario going into, as Jarvis mentioned, an insanely hostile environment. We know that they are going to be out of their minds at US Bank Stadium on Sunday. I will be there because Sunday Night Football is on 11 Alive. So I'm expecting, you know, full silent count and things to be absolutely insane in Minnesota on Sunday.
Yeah, agreed, because this will, of course, be their home opener. And this is one where they pretty much snatched a win from the Chicago Bears last week. So yeah, you're wanting them. They're going in there with a ridiculous amount of momentum. But Aaron, yeah, you're looking at the possibility of Drake London and Darnell Mooney both playing, but to Maria's point, not being 100%. You're looking at the possibility of neither of them playing, or you're looking at the possibility of just one of them playing. And you could see a drop off last week. And even looking back to last season, albeit we know that some of the yards were trash yards, because by the time those yards kind of got piled up, the Vikings had already pretty much taken that game from the Falcons. But nonetheless, you get 142 yards out of Darnell Mooney. You get 70 yards out of Drake London against the Vikings last year. So you at least know, and that was with a Kirk Cousins under center. You at least know that with the Michael Penix Jr. under center, that could be as potent in some important spaces and places this year. So when you look at the fact that you really don't know, because again, the word expects was used, not will. I mean, what does that mean for the potential success or lack thereof against Flores' defense?
Yeah, I mean, you go back to that game last year, you know, Darnell Mooney was really effective stretching the Vikings defense vertically. He had a number of explosive plays in that game, and you got to see sort of the last hurrah of Kirk Cousins, playing good football in that game when he was able to connect with Darnell Mooney. And, you know, so you already have proof of concept of what Darnell Mooney's presence can do against this Vikings defense. And you, as you alluded to, T, you know, you've seen, you know, what Drake London can also do. And so, as you say, like, if you get both of those guys back this week, you know, that's huge for this Falcons passing attack, because, and you kind of saw this on that final drive where you weren't really seeing, you know, Kadero Hodge and Casey Washington get open, right? The Bucs were playing a lot of man coverage, and the Falcons were kind of getting the ball to Ray McCloud and Kyle Pitts on those drives when they were playing man coverage. And then maybe Hodge and Washington got their opportunities once the Bucs switched to more zone, once the Falcons got, you know, on the far side of the field. And it's just, this offense has been so predicated and so successful over the last year, with basically having two man beaters at the wide receiver position in Drake London and Darnell Mooney, that when those guys are on their game, they're in the conversation for one of the best wide receiver duos in the NFL. And when you don't have that, it completely changes how you're forced to play offensively. And as Jarvis alluded to, it's going to change how defenses play you. And it makes it a lot more challenging. And then, as Maria pointed out, if you can't run the ball effectively like that, it's just a complete combination, a complete breakdown of your offense. And so the Falcons need to get at least one of these guys back, I think, in order to impact it. We've talked about the field stretching ability of Darnell Mooney. You didn't get that really last week against Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and I think a lot of that's owed to Mooney's absence. And you saw in the red zone and on third downs, Drake London was the go-to guy. And if you don't have that option, can Kyle Pitts step up in the red zone and be that sort of go-to option? Maybe, but we really haven't seen that sort of, consistency from Kyle Pitts over the last 4 years. And that's one of the things that we're hoping to see more of this upcoming season. He was open on that fourth down go-ahead touchdown that Michael Penix had. But Michael Penix is like, I'm going to do it myself. And so I think those are a lot of the challenges that the Falcons face. And if they don't have one or both of these guys, it's going to be really, really hard to overcome if they can't really get their running game going in a similar way that they did last year in week 2 against the Philadelphia Eagles, which was kind of the thing that was the key to them beating that Eagles team in that week 2 primetime game.
Yeah, Free, because what we don't want to have a conversation about, albeit we love that Bijan Robinson has developed into one of the best pass catchers out of the backfield, but I don't want him at the top of the receiving board having caught 100 yards and being targeted 7 times. That's just not the game that I want to see, because what that then tells me is there's no Darnell Mooney or Drake London isn't available as well. So, yeah, I think they do need – you really hope for both of them. I take both of them at 80% for this Falcons team, just to give Michael Penix Jr. and Zach Robinson as much of a cadre of weapons as they possibly can have, especially if by chance the Falcons, Jarvis, don't have that success on the ground that they want. Not that we want to see Michael Penix Jr. throwing 42 times again, but at a minimum, if he's going to be out there slinging it, at least you want to have your 2 guys, your 1 and your 2 available for you. But that said, we don't want to see that. So how can Zach prevent another game where we're talking about Michael Penix Jr. throwing north of 40 this week against the Vikings?
I think he's going to have to be willing to adjust on the fly quicker, right? So because here's the thing, like, we understand the situation with Caleb McGarry. He knew that Caleb McGarry was not going to be there at the beginning of the year when he's down for the year. So you're working with Elijah Wilkinson, right? And then we had another worst case scenario happen. Chris Lindstrom didn't play that well. Ryan Newsel was struggling against Vita Vea. Matt Bergeron was okay. Jake Matthews had his issues as well. So and then Charlie Warner, my favorite guy, my favorite lineman on this team, offensive lineman on this team, he didn't have the best of games, right? So when you combine all of those things together, like, as the OC, you have to recognize that quickly, and you have to be able to adjust on the fly. And I think that he adjusted by, hey, Mike, save us, and it almost worked. But, like, again, you're at home, and it's quiet when you got the ball. You can communicate well. I remember, like, vividly when Baker Mayfield they were in the huddle and he was trying to get the play. He was like this. He barely could hear. It was so loud in Mercedes-Benz. Yeah, imagine that concept, y'all. Y'all just hear what I just said? It was so loud in Mercedes-Benz Stadium that he could barely get the play in. So Minnesota's known for having that type of advantage. So it's going to be very hard for him to try to have that extra communication, being able to call out, the protections and all that stuff and the pre-snap reads. All of those things are going to have to be pretty much fixed in, as you're coming to that line of scrimmage. So I think that, the offensive line has to be better. They have to be better. There's no option. Like, Elijah Wilkinson, he can be what he is, but you can't have your best offensive lineman on his team, Chris Lindstrom, out there struggling, because guess what? Javon Hargraves is a really good football player. And, the reason why he's been bouncing around a little bit, because, hey, he want to get paid. And Minnesota was more than willing to upgrade their interior defensive line. And I think that this is going to be another test for Ryan Newsel, another test for Matthew Bergeron. And this offensive line is going to have to be the key to, playing better, so Zach Robinson won't have to say, you know what? The only way we're going to be able to do this thing is throw the ball 40 plus times and hope Mike can get the job done. And I just don't want to see that.
Yeah, I don't want to see that either, Maria. I don't think that, and we know that the Falcons can score because according to Jarvis, 28 points is where they need to be at a minimum. But yeah, Maria, we don't want to see a shootout in Minnesota. I don't think a shootout.
I hope that number doesn't become a joke as the season goes along.
It might.
Sorry. But a good joke nonetheless, because we agree with your joke. We agree with it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that having Mike throw the ball 42 times is a recipe for success for anybody. And that's not saying Mike can't do it. Clearly, he kept them in the ball game and gave them an opportunity to potentially win the game. That is possible. And I think, if anything, one of the positives from week one is Mike is going to give you a chance. And that's really what you learned, is that he's going to give you a chance. And then the defense is going to give you a chance to stay in these ball games as well. But offensively, Zach Robinson's got to establish the run. This is not rocket science. We know that this is exactly what needs to happen, especially against this improved interior defense that Jarvis is mentioning. Jonathan Allen is one of those guys as well. So I think that it's very, very important that they establish the run. And even Bijan Robinson, when I was talking to him on Wednesday, is that me? Do you hear that?
I hear something, but I
still hear you the most, Maria.
Okay, good. Yeah. All right, we're gonna keep going. I don't know what it is. It's something playing in the background. But
there's a lot going on right now. But yeah, go ahead, continue.
Okay, Maria. So there's a lot going on. So Bijan Robinson on Wednesday had said that they were simply outmatched up front, which I thought was very interesting when it came to Tampa. So a lot of people say, "Oh, it's the Falcons' issues," and don't get me wrong, Jarvis is on point with the offensive line. They didn't play well, and there were issues that could be cleaned up. It was week 4 for crying out loud. They're going to get there. But what I'm saying is, let's not take away what Tampa was able to do really, really well against the Falcons team. And so that shouldn't be everyone's mindset is just, oh, this Falcons offense was the worst ever. I watched the all 22 back. I watched the entire game and I watched it twice. And there were issues that I saw multiple times on offense. But for me, it was more of what Tampa was able to adjust defensively to really suffocate Atlanta on offense. Zach Robinson's got to do a better job of doing that in-game. Those in-game adjustments are going to be critical in Minnesota. You're mentioning the silent count and that it's going to be really loud. They are going to have to completely make sure that they are on every P and Q when it comes to that in order to be successful offensively. And they started doing that in practice. They had speakers blowing behind the offense on Wednesday. Bijan Robinson even told me that's what they were doing throughout the duration of practice, pumping up the noise, making sure they get the silent count down in practice so that when they're in the building at US Bank Stadium, they'll be good to go. So establishing the run is going to be critical for them, especially if you're down these pass catchers that we hope that they're not. If you're not running the football effectively, you're not really giving this offense a chance to do what I think they can do well.
Yeah, I think the challenge for the Falcons is, as Maria said, they got to be able to establish the run. If they don't have balance in their offense, it's going to be a struggle. If they get one-dimensional against Brian Flores, that's a recipe for disaster. And especially given what we're talking about with maybe not necessarily having your top weapons 100%. You go back to that Dallas game last year where the Falcons were able to beat the Cowboys and CeeDee Lamb was dealing with the shoulder injury that entire game. And CeeDee Lamb did a great job gutting through that injury, but you could see how it affected his ability to play and to be the CeeDee Lamb that he's capable of being. And so you could have a similar situation with Drake London and or Darnell Mooney this week. So, I think the Falcons will have to find a way to be a little bit more balanced. But, the good thing is that Michael Penix showed that, if he needs to put the cape on, he's capable of putting the cape on. So, there are worse places to be. When the Falcons have been in much worse places when they've needed a quarterback to put the cape on the last couple of years and they haven't necessarily been able to put the cape on. It's somewhere lost in the laundry or something like that. So, yeah, we'll see
for those quarterbacks. I'll say it. Thank you, Aaron.
So we'll see if they need Michael Penix to put the cape on, and if he and the rest of the team will come through. I'm confident in Michael Penix. It's the rest of the team that needs to kind of step up and do their jobs more so on Sunday night.
Yeah, well, one guy better cape and cape real fast. His name is Younghoe Koo. We'll talk about what that looks like when we take it under further review. This episode of our Falcons Squad Show is brought to you by 5 Hour Energy Time to fuel up and turn it up with 5-Hour Energy Transfusion. This grape, ginger, and lime flavored shot brings the iconic taste of a golf course favorite to a non-alcoholic boost. Perfect for sinking birdies or making great memories with friends. It's a hole-in-one for your energy game. So whether you're out on the course or just a little in need of a push to power through your day, 5-Hour Energy Transfusion delivers the clubhouse flavor you love without ever leaving the green. So what's the wildest shot you've ever made? Was it a total fluke or well-calculated miracle? I bet it was something that, hey, you had some extra energy, but you could always use even more energy on the golf course. So golf is about good times, good people, good energy, good flavors. The grape ginger lime flavor of 5-Hour Energy Transfusion gives you the best parts of your clubhouse go-to without leaving the course or chasing down the bev cart. Now you can amp up the fun even more. Just buy, snap, and enter for a chance to win a dream golf trip for two to any golf tournament in the USA. So tee up that trip. Visit 5hewin.com for full rules and entry. No purchase necessary. Excludes the Masters tournament. Ends October 31st, 2025. So, Aaron, the Falcons signed kicker John Parker Romo to the practice squad. Coach Ross said they have to create high-level competition at that position. And since you are still a guy who's on the Younghoe Koo bandwagon, I thought we would start with these players. Should there even be a kicking competition at this point?
For a total count of 2.
Well, I think now we get an actual kicking competition as opposed to what we got in the summer with Lenny Krieg, where it was just kind of like, it became pretty clear, like, no shade at Lenny Krieg, but it became pretty clear that he's more of a developmental guy than a guy that was really brought in to come in and push Younghoe Koo. And so now you get a guy like John Parker Romo, who has some experience playing in the pros, played with Minnesota last year, played in the XFL the previous year. So he has some real, professional kicking experience. And so this is now potentially a real competition. And so, we can certainly, use hindsight, especially coming off a loss where, Younghoe Koo had a critical moment and did not come through in that critical moment to say, like, this is something that the Falcons should have done months ago. But, we're here now. We you can't put the toothpaste back in the tube, as they say. So I think, I think this, it's a good thing that the Falcons are having this real competition and may the best man win. But, going back to what I said at the top of the show, like, I understand why the Falcons have shown loyalty to Younghoe Koo, because again, this NFL league it's about what have you done for me lately. And because Younghoe Koo has missed 2 clutch kicks in the last like 8 games that the Falcons have played, that's all what people think about. And people forget that he also made 2 clutch kicks, in the previous 8 games. And then you go back to the previous year, where the Falcons win 3 games because of Younghoe Koo. And so I understand why the team is showing probably more loyalty to Younghoe Koo than people think he deserves based off of the most recent performances he's had, just because I think the Falcons are hopeful that he'll get it back, and just sort of immediately just tossing the keys to somebody else that is not that experienced like they did last year with Riley Patterson is not something that I think the team is going to take lightly. And so with a guy like John Parker Romo, he has made 1 clutch kick in his NFL career, as far as I know, where he kicked a game winner in overtime from 29 yards out against the Bears last year when he was playing for the Vikings. And so that's something that you can, I won't say trust, but like, it's something, right? And so, but like, it's not enough at this point in time to be like, oh, he clearly is the answer to be the guy, because he's proven it time and time again at this point in time. And so I understand why the Falcons aren't quite ready to cut the cord with Younghoe Koo, and probably will give him at least 1 more shot this weekend. Now, obviously, there's a lot of risk that goes with that, because if the Falcons give him that shot and he misses another kick, people are going to be like, Younghoe Koo's the reason why you started 0-2 and all that stuff. So that's, but these are the margins in the NFL. Like, this is the risk reward of playing in the National Football League. And so, the Falcons have made this bet, and now they got to lie in it.
Yeah. And that's the thing, Free. Like, it's tough and I hear what you're saying, by the way, but it's tough not to look back at the summer, and it's tough not to think, okay, well, why wasn't it really more of a robust competition? Like, why didn't the Falcons start looking for a legit kicker that might have been out there in the offseason, like a legitimate kicker that they could have picked up? But you didn't, because to Jarvis's point when we were talking pre-production, it's because you really had a sort of allegiance, for lack of a better term, to Younghoe Koo. And now, Jarvis, here we are with facing the possibility of the fallout of that allegiance.
Yeah, I mean, Younghoe Koo is a cheater, and it's time to divorce him. Like, this is who he is. Like, he's cheating. He been cheating. He was cheating last year, and I know he was injured and all that stuff. He had all the excuses. He was going through some stuff. You know what I'm saying? Trying to go to therapy because he thought he was like a sexual predator, all that stuff. He feed himself. He was feeding the beast inside of him. But y'all follow me. Don't look like that, Aaron. You know where I'm going.
I'm equally as whatever. It's not just Aaron, but keep going.
I'm trying to come back. So let me bring it back.
All right.
So, I feel like this is the stage where I feel like this offseason was a stage where you try to go to counseling. You know what I'm saying? Go to marriage counseling, talk about the other options out there, some young, you don't want no young, fancy thing, she gonna walk out of you after 6 months, she ain't gonna cheat you, right? But, Younghoe Koo, hey, come on back. So let's go to therapy together and just let's try to work this thing out. And then guess what he did in week 1? He cheated on you again. He went right back. He went right back to that website that he wasn't supposed to go to. You know what I'm saying? Like, so yeah, I think we're at this moment right now, it's time to divorce. Now, I kind of agree with Free when you're talking about, I'm not saying they should cut him, but if John Procoromo shows that he can be consistent, if he shows that in this competition that, hey, I'm the guy, Raheem Morris should have no qualms about saying, all right, Younghoe Koo, you're down this week, and John Procoromo, you're up. Let's go. Let's go win the game on the road.
But and so, Maria, when you think about that, like that's a tall order, and it kind of goes against what Raheem Morris has done, right? And that is, we look back at Kirk Cousins as Exhibit A, when everyone thought he should have ditched him and moved on to Michael Penix Jr. much sooner last year, and that could have maybe saved the Falcons' postseason bid. But now here you are, fast forward, and it's difficult to kind of think that Raheem Morris is going to cut the cord at the appropriate time, because he is a guy who has shown and stated that he has an allegiance to Younghoe Koo. So I don't even know at this point. I think we all believe, and maybe you disagree, so you let me know, but I think we all agree that there should be a kicking competition at this point. But I think the question becomes, Maria, do you really think there is or will be?
Yeah, I think that the Kirk Cousins, Michael Penix situation is very, very different than this. And I will say that direct quote from Raheem Morris last year and in training camp is he has emotional bank accounts with Younghoe Koo. Like, he literally laid it all on the table to let you know that he is very much invested with Younghoe Koo. I can't use the marriage analysis that Jarvis did. I'll let him run with that. But what I will say is that the emotional investment with Koo clearly has weighed heavily on the mind of Raw for a very long time. And I personally think Younghoe's got the yips. You talk about it in baseball all the time, and I felt like he was going to be given an opportunity against Tampa to prove that he's over it. I don't know why Dex, my dog, wants to chime in on this subject, but he's going to have his opinion too. He's very fired up about the kicker. So Tampa and the Falcons, they always play these tight ball games. I knew that it was going to come down to something dealing with Younghoe Koo at some point, and it did, and he couldn't get past it. To me, that was his last mental hurdle to overcome, and that was just it's not working right now. And kickers are too important and too critical of a situation or a position in the NFL to really mess around with for a long time, because especially in the NFL when the margins are so thin in your games, think about all of the one-score games that the Falcons had last year, and you really had to be dependent on that person to actually help you win the game. I think it's becoming too much of a forefront issue for the Falcons to really ignore it. I commend them for bringing in a bunch of veteran kickers and trying them out, and then bringing Parker Romo on for now, and him competing with Younghoe Koo. Wednesday was the first day that they said they were actually competing against each other. But at what point do you need to turn the page? Is it one more kick that you miss to lose a game? I don't know. Because then Raheem is completely tied to that. And you hitched your wagon to him early on for the good days. You're going to go down with him if you hitch him to your wagon when things like that consistently happen. It's a big gamble. It's a big risk. I think Younghoe, to Aaron's point and to Jarvis's point, have done unbelievable. He had done unbelievable things for this franchise throughout the duration of his career here. He's been here forever. However, there comes a time where things change, and I feel like that's right now, because until he proves differently, that's where I'm at with that. I think he's got the yips. I think it's a mental thing, because he was even hooking them in warmups. Jarvis was watching it. Yep. And it's one of those things where in training camp, we watched him. He looked great. He was fine. Whatever. He's at practice. You get him out there in Mercedes-Benz Stadium for some reason, because it's so in between the ears for Younghoe at this point. It's not working. I think it wouldn't hurt to bring in truly another person to try to compete and try to help you win ball games.
Yeah, well, and one thing, Aaron, that Maria was saying, that, so I'll switch analogies, is if it's not so much like a Kirk Cousins situation, it feels like a Dan Quinn situation where there's an emotional tie there, and we might be at a point in place where, hey, it's just been too long. Like, it's just been too much. And you get to a point in place where we all know Dan Quinn, we know when he should have been let go, and we know when he actually was let go, and we know what that cost the team in terms of setting back and kind of like resetting. But yeah, I think ultimately you're probably right, Maria, in that maybe Raheem Morris was not as emotionally tied to Kirk Cousins as say he is Younghoe Koo. So it may actually remind me more of how tied to the organization with Arthur Blank that Dan Quinn was, and how that ultimately did this franchise in, because it really set them back far longer and away from the playoffs than they had to be. And we're still having that conversation, waiting for that death of the Darth of appearing in the playoffs, because, hey, you were just too tied to, too supportive of, too devoted, and had too much of an allegiance to somebody who the team should have and the franchise should have moved on from. Now, Brick, how does he break down a potent Vikings offense? We will unpack that in Next Up. This episode of our Falcons Squad Show is brought to you by FanDuel. The NFL season is here, and FanDuel is making sure you're ready for kickoff with a can't-miss offer. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. Now, you're going to love using FanDuel because it fits however you like to bet. Player props, building a same-game parlay, or even jumping in live as the action unfolds. It makes every game more exciting, whether you're watching your team or just keeping an eye on your fantasy lineup. It's quick, it's easy, and it's the best way to add a little more energy to Sundays. So are you ready to play? Download the FanDuel app now by visiting FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com to place your first $5 bet. The NFL season is here, so why not make sure that you're ready for kickoff with a can't-miss offer with FanDuel? So, Maria, we're looking at Jeff Ulbrich facing, I think, an even more potent offense than you saw in the Tampa Bay Buccaneers last week, and you really saw it come alive in that come-from-behind win against the Chicago Bears that Minnesota Vikings had in week 1. That said, what type of problems does Kevin O'Connell's offense for you present for Jeff Ulbrich? What's maybe that one problem where you say, wow, Brick and company, they're going to have to focus on this week in order for this Falcons team to have a chance?
I think it's the fact that they made 9 games worth of adjustments in the fourth quarter. That was really, honestly, so astonishing to watch. I saw that unfold and I was like, what are we dealing with? I was texting people. I said, oh, the Falcons got this in the bag against this Vikings team. They're like out of sorts, whatever. And then something changed in the fourth quarter. And JJ McCarthy's like, nah, let me call game. And JJ's one of those quarterbacks. He's always kind of been like that. But they struggled a lot. I mean, they were turning the ball over. There were pre-snap penalties. It was putting them in like a lot of different very difficult situations on offense. And then all of a sudden, click, fourth quarter happened. And when you're building on a fourth quarter comeback like that, you better believe this offense has got a lot of confidence. They're going to come out firing on all cylinders like, oh, we've got this figured out. The fourth quarter is exactly what we need to continue to do. They're going to come in with a lot of things more prepared than they did against Chicago in Monday Night Football. Even though it's a quick turnaround for them, the short week doesn't matter because of what happened in that final quarter. I thought it was impressive. It earned NFC Offensive Player of the Week honors for JJ McCarthy, who only threw for 132 yards. It's wild. Yeah. And it's simply being given based on that final quarter. So, I think Jeff Ulbrich has his hands full with this Vikings offense. There's a lot of different pieces, new pieces. Justin Jefferson, not as much of a threat as I probably would have thought he would have been on Monday Night Football. But he's Justin Jefferson. He's always a threat. You always got to make sure that you account for JJ. But one thing that I thought was really encouraging, especially watching the film back, Jeff Ulbrich, there's not a big sample size on what he's trying to do defensively for the Falcons, which is a big deal heading into this game against JJ McCarthy, a new quarterback navigating that. He does a lot of different things. Jeff Ulbrich has told us multiple times, I'm going to be odd front at times, even front at times. He very much was that. He showed us bare front, odd front, even front, and there were a lot of interchangeable things on defense. Continue to do some of that, and I think they'll find a lot of success against this Vikings offense.
Yeah, and I think you make a great point, Maria, about JJ McCarthy and what he was able to do in that fourth quarter. And
wild.
I'm like you. I was watching that game, kind of stepped away and said, oh, wow, this is a lock. And I said, advantage, Falcons. Until the fourth quarter, and you started to see JJ McCarthy do some different things. And the fact, Jarvis, that he was able to get touchdowns in the air and on the ground, because he didn't net a lot of rushing yards. I mean, he only had 2 carries for 25, but heck, if one of your carries is going to be for 14 yards, if one of your carries is going to be for a touchdown, that's that space where initially you're not looking at JJ McCarthy as one of the real dual threat quarterbacks, right? But he does have the ability to scramble. So you're thinking to yourself, like, how's that going to impact? That was one of the things that I think made me a little bit nervous, because thinking, and a thing that I think Brick has to work on, because when I looked at Baker Mayfield and his ability to use his legs just enough to extend plays, I'm like, yeah, you don't have to be a true dual threat, but if you've got that kind of mobility, that could pose a challenge for Jeff Ulbrich's defense. But for you, what's maybe that thing that you need to see from Jeff Ulbrich, because Kevin O'Connell's offense is going to be a problem?
I feel like Kevin O'Connell is going to take the reins off of JJ McCarthy just a little bit, because I felt like that was an ultra conservative game plan that he came out with. Yeah. I feel like he didn't want JJ to put the ball in harm's way, even though he ended up doing that anyway. And I feel like that was one of the reasons why I was like, okay, y'all are being uber conservative. Y'all turned around and handed the ball off to Aaron Jones. That wasn't working. They end up inserting Jordan Mason. Then all of a sudden, boom, it clicked. They start getting some momentum with that run game. And I think that's what I kind of want, because like I mentioned at the top of the show, I want them to make him look like a young quarterback. I don't want people coming out of this game because, it's Sunday Night Football. All the national analysts are going to say, oh, JJ McCarthy was the right pick. I don't want to hear that. You know how you don't hear that? You make him look like a young quarterback. You make him make bad decisions. And to be honest with you, the Falcons made Baker Mayfield make some bad decisions and some bad throws last week. But they just
feels like last year at this point, honestly.
Right. We still talking about Younghoe Koo being on this team. That's why I feel like I'm not last year.
Give me 2024.
I'm trying to move into 2025, baby. Koo was 2024. You know what I'm saying? We're trying to move on. But anyway, but I think that Kevin O'Connell, given what we saw in the fourth quarter, because it was almost like he had an aha moment. Oh, I do have Justin Jefferson as my number one wide receiver, and they have backup cornerbacks on both sides of the field. So yeah, let me try to take advantage of that. How about that concept? Tyreek Stevenson. I mean, God bless him, but he's not that great. So that's the reason why he's a backup. So I think that I think Minnesota, Kevin O'Connell kind of played around. He was conservative, and what I'm having trepidation about is him opening up that offense a little bit more, focusing in on the run game, because even though the Falcons were pretty solid against the run, I feel they have to prove to me that they can be stout consistently against the run, be able to get off blocks, get in the backfield, put pressure on that running back, make them make a move, and force them to their teammates. And guys like Divine Diablo, who's more than willing to come downhill and pop somebody in the mouth. So, yeah, that's my biggest concern.
Yeah, and as Jarvis was talking about his concern free, I go back to the beginning of what he was talking about, because you look at JJ McCarthy, and yeah, he put that ball in harm's way a couple times, just as Baker Mayfield did. So for me, it's not so much maybe what Brick is able to dial up, but maybe I'm looking to see, okay, what he and Jerry Gray can do together just to tweak things a little bit there, so that those missed opportunities, those near picks, if you will, actually turn into picks. But for you, because I think, hey, getting a turnover, if you will, giving that ball back to Michael Penix, hopefully in situations where it's a short field, can potentially produce dividends. But what type of problems, or what problem in specific for you, or in particular for you, does Kevin O'Connell's offense present for Jeff Ulbrich that concerns you the most?
Well, I think the main concern you have is, like, and it gets to what we're talking about with JJ McCarthy looking like a first time starting quarterback for 3 quarters and then turning it on in the fourth quarter, is you did not get anything close to the best version of the Vikings offense last week, right? Yeah. Justin Jefferson was basically a non-factor in that game until late in the game. As Jarvis alluded to, Jordan Mason had some success on the ground, but Aaron Jones wasn't a big factor in that game until late in the game, where he had a big catch down the field. TJ Hawkinson had a quiet day. Adam Thielen, basically, I think the only catch he had in that game was a 2-point conversion or whatever. And so, like, you didn't get the best version of the Vikings offense last week, and they still figured out a way to win that football game. And one assumes, because of the reputation that a coach like Kevin O'Connell has earned over the last couple of years, that he's going to be able to coach those guys up, especially going home. It's a more friendly environment. We know historically, whether we go back to Matt Ryan's early career in Atlanta, where he was very good at home and not so good on the road those first couple of years. And you can imagine a similar situation with someone like JJ McCarthy coming out of the gate. So the expectation I think you have, if you're Jeff Ulbrich, is like, oh, like the version of the Vikings that we saw last week against Chicago on the road in that first game is probably not the version of the Vikings that we're going to get this week. And we got to be prepared to be able to, it's not just going to simply be, oh, like JJ McCarthy is going to have the yips, to borrow a phrase from Maria, in the first 3 quarters. We got to go into this game expecting him in that offense to be executing a lot better than it probably did for 3 quarters of last week's game. And we have to go out there defensively and make Adam Thielen be a non-factor. We got to make TJ Hawkinson be a non-factor. We got to be able to stop Aaron Jones and Jordan Mason and obviously Justin Jefferson. And if we can do that, it's not just simply, hey, they're going to be going through their struggles. We got to go out there and stop them from doing the things. And I think that's going to be the challenge. And we saw last week, where the Falcons put a lot of attention to keep Mike Evans contained, but Emeka Egbuka went off for them, right? That's what that situation was. Like, you're focusing all your attention, and you're going to see a similar situation with Justin Jefferson this week, where you're going to have everybody focus on Justin Jefferson. I imagine AJ Terrell is going to shadow him for the game. I imagine AJ Terrell is going to get safety help for the game. And so that means Mike Evans, Billy Bowman, you guys are going to be one-on-one in your situations. And can you lock down Jalen Naylor? Can you lock down Adam Thielen much better than the Falcons were able to do last week against Emeka Egbuka? I think, Egbuka is a better receiver than either one of those 2 guys that Minnesota has, but it's not, when you're stuck on an island, you're prone to get beat, right? Like, that's just the nature of being a cornerback. And so those are going to be the things that the Falcons are going to have to eliminate. And as you said, T, if they can not only stop those guys from, catching the football, but can create turnovers, that's going to be huge for this Falcons defense moving forward.
And mind you, AJ Terrell just had a phenomenal game against Tampa, by the way.
Yeah. And I think, Maria, I'm glad you kind of threw that out there, because that may be one of the things that we've spoken about the least this week. The fact that he had a tough assignment in week 1, and he rose to the challenge, and you're going to need him to do that, because you have at least one of the guys out there who torched the Falcons last year. Obviously, Jordan Addison is suspended, so at least 133 yards are theoretically gone away. But that guy, Justin Jefferson, don't expect him to have back-to-back games that are just subpar. It's not going to happen. So this defense has to be prepared for what this Vikings offense is going to do. And as Jarvis said as well, you can't expect them to play like they did for about 3 1/3 quarters in week 1. They're going to open up this offense, and Falcons have to be prepared. But that said, another thing that Jarvis alluded to, Maria, was the pressure. Yes, the defense was able to pressure Baker Mayfield at a high clip, but we're only talking about getting him back on the ground one time. Now, granted, the good thing is JJ McCarthy got sacked 3 times. So there is opportunity to get home for this Falcons team this Sunday. But how does Ulbrich help his guys to get in position to get home this week?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that we've been talking about is JJ McCarthy looking like a young quarterback in the first 3 quarters of that game. Keep in mind, he had like 0 help from his offensive line, okay? And so that'll make anybody look like a struggling quarterback. And I think that's a really good matchup for Jeff Ulbrich because this Minnesota Vikings offensive line has their struggles, and it's very well documented on tape in one game. There are issues there that you can exploit. And I know that we're so obsessed with the pass rush, and we've talked about it for years because it's been so depleted. It's impossible not to become obsessed with it and want it so badly. It really it doesn't happen overnight. I know that it wants to be this aha moment for everybody, and all of a sudden we're getting quarterbacks on the ground, 3 times a game. I don't know if that's really going to be the case for the Falcons. I think it's coming, and there were very, very good signs of it in week 1 against Tampa. Divine Diablo, the guy moves very quickly. The guy knows where he's supposed to be. It was very refreshing to watch Divine Diablo and to watch somebody that alleviates Caden Ellis for a change. It was just incredible to watch. So, I think continuing to get that pressure there, and get more from your rookies, the guys that you drafted in the first round. I'm not talking about the guys on the back end. I'm talking about the guys that are literally put on your roster to implement pressure. You need more from those guys. And it's not really their fault when you're interchanging them as much as you are, but, continue to put pressure on those guys to put pressure on opposing offenses. I think that that's going to be a key. But yeah, I mean, I like this matchup for the Falcons, especially up front against a Vikings offensive line that genuinely struggled on Monday.
Yeah. And Free, what about you? What do you think Brick can do to help his guys get home?
Yeah, it's going to be a little bit more challenging, I think, for the Falcons than it was for the Bears, because the expectation is Christian Darrisaw is going to be back this week. And, not only is he a much better pass protector than his backup, Justin School, he's also one of the best run blocking left tackles in the NFL. And so that's going to be the key I think the Vikings are going to rely on, which is we're going to run the football. And so that's going to prevent the Falcons from getting into those situations that they were able to get into last week. And being able to dial up some of the pressure that they were able to bring guys like Divine Diablo, et cetera, to dial up those pressure on some of those key third downs. So I think, I'm sure Jarvis will say the similar things, is you need the Falcons to be able to stop the run effectively in order to, get into advantageous situations where they can get that pressure and force JJ McCarthy to make some rookie mistakes. And so, down in distance, the first mention, or maybe not the first mention, but, the first big mention of it here on the Falcons Squad Show, has begun today. So down in distance is going to be real key for this team on Sunday night.
Mm.
Yeah, I think one of the things that you have to do is you have to make sure, I will carry this over from what I said last week, and I'll wrap it here. Very, very in a bow. You got to put JJ on his back. You got to put the man on his ground. You can't have him extending plays, having your guys out there, covering Justin Jefferson for an extra 2 seconds. That's just a bad scenario to be in. Even Adam Thielen, because guess what? NFL wide receivers can get open. So you don't want the best wide receiver in the league out there trying to figure out a way to show the quarterback his numbers, because we know he can make the throw down the field.
Yeah, exactly. So how does Ra then help this team to redeem itself this week and come home with a win? We'll tell you in the look ahead. This episode of our Falcon Squad Show is brought to you by Mazda. You can just move through life, or you can find the things that move you. It's your choice. You can choose to get out there, choose your people. You can choose to go for it, like really go for it. Just choose to do something that moves you. Mazda crafts cars for those who choose to do more than simply move. So again, you can just move through life, or you can find the things that move you. It's your choice. Go for it. Like really go for it. Do like Mazda, because they craft cars for those who choose to do more than simply move. Mazda, move and be moved. So Jarvis, based off what you saw last week, do you feel like Raheem Morris will be able to make the right decisions in those key moments, especially if this game is decided down the stretch? We know the timeouts, challenges, just clock management overall. Those were some of the things that he really got dinged for in his first season as official head coach here with the Atlanta Falcons. We saw some good things last week, Jarvis. I think you said, I'm going to use your word from Monday's show, you saw some elevation, if you will, in those spaces. But ultimately, do you feel like he'll be able to make those right decisions in key moments, especially if it comes down to the wire with this Vikings team, the way it did with them against Chicago?
I believe so. I believe so because I only can go off of what I see, right? Like we had one game sample size, and based off of what I saw last week, I thought he made some challenges when he had to. Now he didn't win all of them, but I feel like in those moments he had to at least see what the outcome could be, and it could work out in their favor. And for me, I understand that that's what you want in your head coach. You want him to be there in those situations and make those right decisions. And whether it be to go forward on fourth down, even though they didn't get those off, they didn't get both of those, but you said that in those moments you had to go for it. So I feel like that was based off of what I saw last week. I feel like he can do this. Like obviously everything is going to be a little heightened with you being on the road. Those things are going to work out in your favor. And then you got a really good coaching staff that they're going up against. Like I said, Kevin O'Connell, although I thought he had a conservative game plan, he still looked at one of those guys in the league, right? A lot of people love Kevin O'Connell. I haven't heard anyone say anything bad about Kevin O'Connell, especially when it comes to developing quarterbacks and his system actually working for whoever he brings into the fold. So I think that, based off what I saw and what Raheem Morris did last week, I feel like he does give this team at least a chance to make the right decision in the right time when it benefits that team in that particular situation.
Yeah. And what about you, Bree? We think we saw some growth. We think we saw some good opportunities, as Jarvis called out. The challenges seem to be made at the right moments, but is Ra able, you feel, to make those right decisions again, especially because feels like to me there's a little bit more pressure going into game 2 because of the loss in game 1?
Yeah, my answer T is we'll see. It's kind of the opposite of the Younghoe Koo situation, where I think with Younghoe Koo, when you look at the overall body of work, you like what you see. The recent body of work has not been good. With Raheem, it's like the overall body of work with this stuff that we're talking about, the challenges and going forward on fourth down and use clock management, is not great. But the recent example that we have from week 1 is a pretty solid thing. So to me, you kind of have to build it up a little bit more for me to have complete faith that we're not going to get regress back to what some of the things we've seen in the past from Raheem in this space. And so that, to me, I think is where I'm at with it, where it's just like, yeah, I think you saw positive sides, but as you said, I think there's going to be, situations probably most weeks where it's going to be put on display. How much growth can you get consistent? Because like just the nature of the Falcons, like we saw last week, I think we'll see it again this week. I think we'll see it several times over the next, 4 to 6 games where they're going to be in 1-score games in the fourth quarter, and who wins the game is going to be basically determined by who makes the right plays, who doesn't make the critical mistakes, who puts their team in advantageous situations in those closing minutes of the game. And that's going to be to determine who actually ultimately wins the game. And especially when you, as Jarvis alluded to, when you talk about Kevin O'Connell and his reputation, and then you have like the whole kickoff thing that came in that Monday night game where, they bleed that time with that real poignant decision to bring that kickoff out of the end zone to seal that win. Kevin O'Connell kind of earned the benefit of the doubt, given how good that Vikings team has been over the last 3 years or 2+ years now, in terms of, 1-score games, right? They were famously in that one season with Kirk, like 11-0 in 1-score games and whatnot. So the Falcons haven't had that same sort of level of success. And so it's still a proving ground with Raheem Morris. But I think based off of what we saw in week 1, the arrow is pointing up. We'll just see if it continues to point up.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point, Free, because when we look at the schedule, and we've always kind of thought this, like, it's pretty much a gauntlet, Bucks through Bills, right? And so I think we all knew that Bucks Falcons was going to be a one-score game, and was. And the Vikings, I think, based on what we saw from them last week, I'm going to go with Vikings and Commanders, not so much a one-score game that I'm pointing to, Free and JD, but more of those were teams that, I'll take the Vikings. Let me take them first. You look at the Vikings and you look at the Bills, and those are teams that had to mount comebacks. So those could be close games for the Falcons. And then you look at the Commanders, not exactly world beaters against the lowly Giants. It was an okay sort of game for them. So yeah, I think that all the arrows are pointing in the direction of going into the fourth quarter and being in a dogfight. And if you're in a dogfight in the fourth quarter, everybody, Raheem Morris, Zach Robinson, Jeff Ulbrich, the right calls have to be made. The right decisions have to be made when it's timeouts. Everything has to be right, but it all starts with Raheem Morris and how he's calling that game. And speaking of that, when you look at this game, we've talked about the coach. We talked about the coordinators and what it is that they need to do, keys to the game for them. But Jarvis, keys to the game for you as far as a player or something that you need to see happen in order for the Falcons to walk away with the win?
This offensive line has to be better as a group. I know Elijah Wilkinson had his moments with the pre-snap penalties and all that stuff and having his issues with Hassan Reddick. Most people have issues with Hassan Reddick coming off the edge, in pass situations. So for me, I feel like they have to be better as a group. There's no way that you can, if you telling me that, the way the Falcons ran the football last week, they're going to do the same exact thing this week. I think we're looking at a loss for this team because you just can't. You got to have some balance. It can't be having him sitting back there and just trying to sling the ball all over the yard. Now, granted, Minnesota is dealing with some injuries. Van Ginkel didn't practice earlier this week. So when you have those situations, like, hey, one of your better pass rushers not being out there, all right, that might give you a chance. But it has to be Chris Lindstrom. Oh man, he looked like the best offensive lineman, the best guard in the league. Yeah, those are the type of conversations that we need to be having in order for the Falcons to have some success against this Minnesota Vikings team, because we know Brian Flores. We know what he's going to do. He's going to have that mug look. He's going to have those linebackers in those A gaps at the beginning of the snap, and you don't quite know whether or not they're going to drop or they're going to come, or they're going to have some defensive linemen dropping off. Like, you just don't know what it is. And the film study is going to have to come through, and Michael Penix is going to have that preparation to understand, like, okay, more than likely, here's what I'm going to get once this ball is snapped. As long as he has a good sense of that and they are able to establish the run, they'll be able to get this win. But yeah, the offensive line, it all starts with the offensive line, and they have to be better.
Yeah, I echo the same sentiments that Jarvis did. To me, it's really about they have to be able to run the football. As I said earlier, like, you do not want to be one-dimensional against this Vikings defense. That is a recipe for disaster. As good as Michael Penix is, you're just setting him up to fail in that regard. And given the concerns we have at the wide receiver position, like, it's just not going to go well for the Falcons, right? You're going to need divine intervention. Maybe Divine Diablo gets a pick six or something like that. That's basically what you need in that sort of situation. So I do think running the football is going to be key for this football team. If they can do that, that'll put them in advantageous situations. That'll take a lot of pressure off of Michael Penix, and that will allow them to be able to, control the clock and move the ball and fight fire with fire and all that stuff. So I think running the football is really the key for this team heading into the season.
Yeah, and we didn't really talk about this, but in looking at that injury report from Monday, Jamal Agnew was a DNP. And so you look at, and Casey Washington the same, albeit Casey Washington more because of the concussion. But the Jamal Agnew is a concern, because my call for keys to the game, or whether that was player or whether that was unit, was going to be, you already know, special teams. Mm-hmm. Because we looked at Younghoe Koo today. We talked about him in Sunday's post-game show. But Monday we did a little bit more of a deep dive into special teams underperforming overall. They've got to help flip the field for Michael Penix Jr. as well, so that he doesn't find him having to drive this team the majority of the length of the field. So it is important that they have a bounce back week as well. And don't know if Jamal Agnew is ultimately going to be a go or how they're going to figure it out. But Marquise Williams' unit is going to have to give something as well, because I believe every part of this team, like all three phases, are really going to need to step up their game, because I think, Jarvis, you called it out best. I think the offense that you saw for the Minnesota Vikings, the defense that you saw, because we didn't talk about how they were also, the offense did their job, but then the defense went out there and made Caleb Williams look sub-pedestrian in that fourth quarter. So really, you're looking at a Falcons team that needs to be prepared to excel in all three phases of the game, and more importantly, be able to do it for a full 60 in order for us to be having a conversation post-game about a win, which is, of course, what we hope to do. So thanks to our everydayers for making the Falcons Squad Show your first listen of the day. Be sure to stop by Locked On Falcons with your host, Aaron Freeman, as your second listen, and check out Maria Martin, host of Sports Extra on Sundays on 11 Alive. Our girl is already headed up to Flowery Branch for some special coverage that she'll have for you guys on Sunday's show. And of course, you can catch Jarvis as a frequent contributor for Locked On Falcons and Sports Extra as well. We'll see you next time.